Well, welcome back to another episode. This time it's the BMW X3, which is going to be of no surprise to anyone that's subscribed to the channel, because as you'll know, this Wednesday the F25 BMW X3 series buyer's guide came out. And so, following it up with the Generations video, I'm going to try and do that as much as I can. There are a few cars that it's a bit more difficult to do than others, but the X3 seemed like a really good opportunity. And this car is much, much more interesting than I thought it was going to be. And that's just me being honest with you, because there's a little bit of sort of side information that comes into these cars, and it's not just all about the engines. But let's start off, let's just go straight into it on the E83 generation BMW X3. And for those of you out there that like to know all those little extra details, this is the X3 that doesn't get built in South Carolina. Okay, so although all X3s do get built across world plants, this X3 doesn't get built at the South Carolina plant. All the generations afterwards do. There is an exception with the iX3. Come on to that a little bit later on. That gets built in China, but that's kind of a separate, that's the iX3, not an X3. But as I say, I'll come on to that. And for those of you who like to stick around to the very end, there is a little bit of extra for you, because I'm going to cover the Alpinas of the X3 at the very, very end. Those of you that are really familiar with Alpina will know, with their agreement with BMW, they always build the car that BMW hasn't. That's kind of the gap they've always been able to fill. So BMW leave a gap in their lineup. Alpina are there to fill it. I'll let you think what that could be for the X3s. Now, first generation, you've got 2 litre, 2.5 litre, 3 litre if you're looking at a petrol, and a 2 litre and a 3 litre if you're looking at diesel. Let's just cover off the diesels quickly, because I know the people who are looking at this generation, they're either a huge enthusiast of the brand, or they want this as sort of a compact SUV that's at a budget price. Okay, that's it. Could be a runaround, could be a winter beater that you're just looking to get into, or there could be some other things around it. But for people looking at this, I think one of the most critical areas to know about is the engine. And that's because if you look at a 2.5 or a 3 litre petrol, you're fairly safe. Okay, but I know they're not the most appealing because they're the least fuel efficient. So let's just put those off into the side. 2.5, 3 litre, put them off over there. They're pretty okay. Yeah, you may have some issues with their age now and how people have maintained them, but overall those engines, quite good engines. The 2 litre does have some issues, the petrol 2 litre that is. However, it's a little bit mixed on reporting. And actually I find on the X3, funny enough, that the reports are just slightly higher than the 2 litre in other generations of BMW that they're fitted to. However, the rate that people have a problem with them is quite low. So I'd say there are a lot of checks on them. There is a buyer's guide for this generation X3, so that's good news for you. You can check out that buyer's guide after this video, and you can find out all the things if you're thinking 4-cylinder 2 litre petrol will do you. I'll be honest with you, I sold quite a few of these when I was back selling cars years ago, usually sort of 1, 2, 3 years old. They never really did it for buyers. People just were not that interested. We didn't get that many in, but when we did, they sold really, really slow because they weren't very quick. They weren't very efficient, at least compared to when you step up to the 2.5. The 2 litre was more fuel efficient, but it wasn't a night and day difference. And I think that's what a lot of people were hoping for. And I think what BMW were trying to do, 6-cylinder for the people that really wanted 6 cylinders to remain in BMWs and maybe were just getting the SUV because they needed it for a family reason, but they were coming out of, say, a 3 Series or maybe a 5 Series, and they'd always stuck with a 6-cylinder. BMW thought, well, we need to provide that, but let's put a 2 litre in there. And it just doesn't quite do it. The way the engine is mapped, the way the engine performs in this sort of slightly larger, slightly dumpier on the road feel to it. And I know that's probably being a little bit unkind, but that is just the truth in the 2 litre. So with the petrols, 2.5, 3 litre, 2 litre, if you really, really have to. On the diesels, you want to look between production 2003 to 2006 if you're looking at the 2 litre diesel. So that's the M57 engine. So M, like the miles driven. M57, the first 3 years, good engine, pretty stout. People have done outrageous mileage in those engines, considering they're a 2 litre. Usually with wear and with age, things like turbochargers need to replacing or at least rebuilding. But they're not equipped with a lot of the emissions equipment that comes in around 2006, 2007. So they kind of get away with that side of it. So you're probably not going to be up for having to replace things like a DPF. They're not fitted with DPFs in most markets. So again, just something else you don't have to worry about too much. if you're looking at maintenance. However, this car gets the N47 and it gets it on its earliest years. So 2007 to 2010. I can't rate it as a buy. I actually owned a 3 Series with this engine in it, and that 3 Series had a replacement engine for timing chain failure, and the one I had, I used it as a commuter, and it was fairly obvious fairly quickly that the engine was again having a problem. A friend of mine had a 1 Series with this exact 2-litre diesel engine, 57 plate, so late 2007, through N47, timing chain. I think it stood him for about £1,500, it's about $2,000 US, about 3,000 Aussie dollars. So it gives you an idea of what the repair bill, and that was a few years back. But really, honestly, you know, if you've got a good specialist who's going to be able to tell you the second that a problem starts to appear, maybe, okay, that's fine. And look, the failure rate on them, it's not like, you know, a Ford EcoBoost engine, which I think I might do an engine for a video for those wet belt engines, because some engines get a reputation and they become pretty notorious. But actually, in the real world, you know, on YouTube, they're breaking everywhere, but in the real world, they're not that bad. This 2-litre diesel, 07, 08 particularly, I mean, it is, I would try and avoid it, especially because the price of, say, a 2007, 2008, 2009 2-litre diesel is probably similar to a 2004, 2005, 2006 3-litre diesel. And honestly, take the fuel penalty, okay? That 3-litre diesel on those early years, especially, the reason I'm saying the early years is because, again, it has to get emissions equipment around 2000, end of 2006 into 2007. It has to get that emissions equipment. And so you can go for it. It's still a reliable engine, but there are a few other things that the company has to do to adjust it for emissions equipment. And you're going to be buying 20 years old, you know, or near enough 20 years old. Unless that car's got a full stack of service history and replacements for things like DPFs, catalytic converters. Catalytic converter on most of these, I know people never think they need replacing, they do. And at about 15 years, if they've lasted that long, then they've served their life. That's it. Manufacturer would have sort of said 10 to 15. If they've done 15, they'll be pretty much done. You'd probably still be able to just coax something like a 2-litre petrol through its annual testing for emissions, but everything else is going to become a bit of a test. So if you can find a 3-litre and it's had all its emissions equipment changed, not so bad if you're going 07 to 10. Early ones, though, they just don't have that issue. And, I mean, I remember a guy came in, what did he have? He had something like a 320 diesel. Nice guy, he was originally from Eastern Europe. They'd moved over here, had this car, it was on a foreign number plate still, and I sort of said, look, it's going to be really difficult to do a trade-in on this car because it's not a UK registered car. If you want to go away and UK register it, you can, but it's still left-hand drive in a right-hand drive market. And he said, no, this car here, 550,000 kilometers on it. So in miles, what's that? 300,000, something like that. I was like, okay. And, you know, really, and he was like, yeah, this is never going anywhere. He said it takes him back home. He does long distance journeys in it. He's got space at home to sort of store it. So it was staying there. And the car just ran. You know, he'd driven it that day just to come and look at other cars. He said he was driving it around different dealers and it just carried on going. So that really plays into a well-maintained 3-litre. That's a buy. That's an absolute buy on this generation. But I understand for pricing reasons, maybe you want to look at the 2-litre. If you can, early ones are best. Otherwise, just make sure you've got some budget for some repairs and a really good special if it's late 2-litre diesel. 2.5, 3-litre petrol, that's kind of where the buy would be. And the 2-litre, it's going to feel quite slow in today's traffic. That's just the reality of it. And there's a few other reliability things around it. But a well-serviced one that's been well kept, it's not the end of the world. Let's move on to the F25 generation. This is the generation I've just covered in the video. And honestly, this was a really interesting one because it's the first generation of Alpina vehicles. They'll come in at the end. I will cover them for you. It's the first time that the X3 gets taken, I think, a little bit more seriously from the brand. Okay, in the first generation, the X5 has done really, really well. And it's a clear market for someone who wants a BMW SUV, but either doesn't want to stretch to the budget of the X5 because it is sort of in that premium market. It's not quite going up to I mean, in top spec, it is going to Range Rover money, but it's not quite there. It's sort of competing maybe around the Porsche Cayenne, something like that, Mercedes ML. It's sort of in a market that people who want an SUV BMW might be a bit uncomfortable spending. That is where, in the second generation, BMW really sort of get an idea that actually that first generation, there is a market for it. It's very clear. It's a great seller across all the markets it goes into. Actually, it's a really good seller. And so they say, let's really go for this second generation. Let's bring it a little bit more in line with the X5. Let's offer it some wider engine choice, and what comes into it is the BMW X4, sort of coupe-ish version of the X3. There are some differences in dimensions, but they share the same platform. They're in the same buyer's guide that came out this week, so if you're really interested in this one, you can check out the buyer's guide after this video. The thing for this car, so it's two 2 litres, two 3 litres. That's what you're offered. It's N20, N47, B47 for the diesel, and then I think it's like N52 and N57. I think I'm right in that. Could be wrong. Don't worry. It's more just keeping in your mind you've got 2 litres and 3 litres. First thing I'll just mark out, if you're buying a 28 model, 28i, if you're in the US, that starts off as the older 3 litre engine, and then it gets a revision around the facelift. But actually, no, it's not. It's about 2012-ish, 2013, and it gets the N20, which is the one that Europe have had from the beginning. So the N20 is a turbocharged petrol engine. Let's just do the 2 litres first off, because again, for the diesel, there's a little bit of things to note. N20 engine, mixed reporting on this, if I'm honest, and it's difficult because a lot of people will say there's timing chain issues with the N20. From what I can see on the X3, that's not widely reported. That's on the X3. Different BMWs that are fitted with this same engine code, same architecture, report different problems. And someone picked me up on this in the comments for the X3 video, and I'll come on to that in a moment with the diesel engine. And I said in there, every time I do a buyer's guide for you all, I do not just sort of take information of any old engine and put it into the guides, because that would be a lot easier for me, I have to say. That would save me a lot of time, but that would be unfair to you, because I would just be telling you general information about the engine and not what people are reporting in that particular car. And so I always spend the extra time and I'll look at, are people having, even though the engine is exactly the same, are people having that same problem in a different model? It's usually why they aren't having it in that in one particular car over another, because there are a load of different factors, different types of owners, different types of mileage, different way that the power is spread, especially if you're looking at all-wheel drive versus two-wheel drive, different vehicle weights, and this is the one people never ever think about it, aerodynamics. Aerodynamics is a huge factor in cars, and if you're pushing more air out of your way as you're trying to drive at a highway speed, that's putting more resistance against the car moving forward, that's putting more stress on the engine. It's minimal, but it's there. And after 100,000 miles, it's been there all that time. And so all these factors can play into one engine being really quite reliable. For example, the Z4, the N20s in that is pretty stout in that, to be honest. I put it this way, if my wife eventually gets the Z4 that she wants, we'd buy it with an N20. Because she just loves that engine. She had it in the one that she got ages ago when she worked at BMW for a sort of loaner. She doesn't need a 3 litre particularly. I'd probably try and talk her into a straight 6, because why not? It's the last choice, last chance. But the 2 litre does do the job. The 2 litre in this does have some issues reported, but for the most part, especially if you're looking around that 2012, once it goes into the US, it's a pretty good motor. The only thing is, its competition for the European market is the 2 litre diesel. And that really restricts 2 litre petrol sales, because for the most part, people just don't demand it. This is peak diesel, everyone. This is 2010 to 2017. Peak diesel car motoring. People have had them for a generation, somewhere between 2000 and 2010, especially in Europe. They love them. They are more fuel efficient. They're torquey engines. Manufacturers have really nailed the idea of getting that torque early on in the power delivery, and cars feeling much more powerful than they ever were. I'll give you a very quick example. I once drove someone out in a BMW and it was the 318 Ti Compact. So it's the Compact 3 Series, quite a rare car, not in all markets. And then in an Audi A3 TDI, bought the A3. No question. We came out of the dealer, and I said, there's a straight run here. It's an unrestricted road, you can do 60 miles an hour, 100 kilometers. Second gear, and he did this, and he was like, I want this one. I was like, the other one is technically faster, okay, because from off the line, it would be quicker. And if you were really motoring, it could be quicker. But that diesel torque won him over, and it did for a lot of people. And so in this generation, the 2 litres for many of you, they're not going to be that available, okay? Just something to be aware of. For those of you who are, though, I really like the engine, I think, compared to some of the other engines in the lineup, especially if you want high efficiency, it's a good option. If you're in the US, though, the N52 that you've got in 2011, 2012, and the sort of 2010 production, that's a buy. Just find one that's had its oil changed and some, basic servicing, and then just run it for another 100,000 miles. Like, seriously, they're very reliable engines, and they're sort of old tech. You're just not going to get the fuel economy. But maybe that's not such a big deal if you're in a country where fuel prices are not sort of really critical compared to some other countries where fuel prices are much higher. Diesel engines. So I said in the guide, and it's really good. I really like when people sort of mention, hey, you said this. Can you just double check that? Is there something else that I should know about? And I had a subscriber say, well, you've said in the 3 Series and 5 Series that the the N47, once you get to 2013, is pretty good. But in this guide, you said it's still having issues until it's replaced. And that's just what I found reported on the X3. It's very difficult for me to sometimes differentiate, and I can say the engine gets a revision. So 2007, that diesel engine comes out, 2 litres. It gets a revision in 2010 because so many of them are having problems. I mean, honestly, it's just a real problematic engine, 2007, 8, and 9. 2010, they make their first revision, and it's better, okay? They make a second revision, I think it's the N revision, so it's the end of the engine code, they put an N on the end of it. And 2013, that revision it really does reduce the reporting of cam chain issues and everything that goes with it, and types of engine failures that are an occurrence because of that. However, on the X3, I saw it reported throughout model years. And so I'm going to say, if you can, just avoid the engine, okay? It does not to mean that you can't buy it on a 3 Series or a 5 Series or whatever else. And actually, really helpfully, someone did comment and they said they had a 2015, which I assume was an N47. They'd done 120,000 miles now, and they'd had trouble-free motoring. So it's not to say those engines are all terrible. They do have 2 revisions. The X3 will get those revisions. It's just when the B47 diesel comes out in 2015-ish, depending on your market, that engine is now, I think that's actually still being used, that diesel engine. We'll find out as I go through it, but if I'm getting my memory right, I've got a few numbers held up here right now, and I'm almost positive I'm going to say B47, yeah, until the brand new one comes out. So the B47 engine, it moves everything on, and you just do not see the reported issues with the B47. That's a 2 litre diesel around 2015 onwards. On that engine, just don't see the issues reported that you do on the N57. Is the N57 a terrible engine once you get to 2010 onwards? No. Are people doing 100 plus thousand miles, nearly 200,000 kilometers without problems? Yes. Should you still be aware of it though? Absolutely. Because the problem is, if people buy them and they're not aware of them, they can face the issue that my friend nearly faced on his 1 Series that I told you about, that when he got it to the garage, he's not a car enthusiast, we're good friends for some other interests, and I said to him, just check it because you've got one of the affected engines. Oh yeah. Took it in for his oil service, never mentioned it to the garage, and then starting to hear some sort of ticking. I'm like, yeah, just take it to a BMW specialist, just do it. Seriously, we're talking about engine replacement. Got there, and he got there just in time. So if you know about it, and that what I mean just in time, they were like, yeah, this thing is about to either snap or guides are about to go, something is about to break. Replaced it all, he did another 50,000 miles in the car, sold it. That could be the situation that you're in with an X3, where everything's running fine, you get it checked by a specialist and they go, good thing you brought it to me, you've probably got another 1,000 miles, and then you'd be looking at full engine calamity because the train would break. It would just be sending bits of metal all around the engine, and something would be a catastrophic issue. Okay, so this is why I bring it up. And as I have said in several guides, 2013 revision is a very effective revision. So would I be terrified of the 2-litre diesel? No. Would I make sure that I'm completely aware of it, find a BMW specialist, get them to service it, and every year can say, can you just spend the extra, whatever labour time it is, 20 minutes, get around the back of the engine and just have a look, see if there's anything there that really concerns you, because they'll know what to look for. Doing that, you just avoid the issue. B47 onwards, it's not even a thought. You don't have to be worried about it. Then you move into the 3 litres. Now, the 3-litre N55 engine, Peachman engine. If you buy the X4, you can have it in M40, guys. That's 350 odd horsepower. If you buy it as a 35i, which is the X3, and I believe the X4 still gets a 35i, 302 brake horsepower. If you're in a few European markets, for those of you in the UK watching, I actually searched our UK classifieds. The only ones I could find that were 35i are imports from Japan. I wouldn't be worried about buying an import from Japan as long as it's got sort of some good history behind it and it's with someone who specializes in it and they've done all of the things for you. But yeah, I just didn't see any UK registered ones. When I tried to then use some of the database I used, I couldn't then find reports of them. So either they were offered and no one took BMW up on the offer, which is quite likely because people would have bought the 3-litre diesel over here, or they just weren't offered, or they were factory order and there's barely any of them out there. So if you want one of these, you're going to have to buy an import car, almost certainly. Okay. For the rest of the world, though, the N55, you get a lot of reports of N54 engines. So if you're not a car expert and you've clicked on this, 2007, BMW bringing this 3-litre straight-six twin turbocharged engine. Everyone goes, oh, this is amazing. I can tune it. This is like what is it? It's like the new Supra type engine. And it's ironic from where we're going to go in a moment, but it was a tunable engine from BMW. BMW actually, in the first 6 months of production, they had a diff that you could, it was open diff, but it could be moved to a limited slip diff. People did that, remapped the engine, they were going faster than M3 in a straight line. BMW found that out, and they made the diff much more difficult to modify so that it remains an open diff car, because that will slow it down. Even if you sort of modify the engine to make the engine faster, you've still got an open diff. I think in the aftermarket they've sort of solved that now, but that just shows you how good this engine was, that BMW were like, oh, we don't want people not buying the M3 and sort of buying the thinking man's car. Alpina got straight on that M54. But the M54 wasn't perfect. Okay, it did have some reliability issues. BMW then switched to the N55, and in the M55, it just gave them that time to work on the engine for reliability, still give people the horsepower they wanted, possibly not quite as tunable. I mean, that's very debatable, and for an X3, we don't need to go into it. The main thing for you is, it's a really good engine, not the most fuel efficient, but if you're someone, a bit like myself, maybe you're way above average height, maybe you're a bit of a larger person, maybe you've got sort of bad knee or whatever else that means that you can't get down into things like the 1 Series, 2 Series, 3 Series, 4 Series. Those cars are just a bit too low for you. But you're a car enthusiast, that's why you've clicked on this video on YouTube and you thought, oh, I really like a car that I can enjoy. I don't want to spend massive money on it, but something that I can get in the corners and at least feel like I'm still there with everyone else going around in their, I don't know, old Triumphs or Z3s, actually, there we go, you know, something like that. The X3 with an M55, it can do it for you, okay? It really can. If you can get an X4 with the M40, then you've got 350 horsepower, more than most drivers will ever need, and the way it's delivered is very different to the B58 that we'll come onto in the next generation. On an M55 engine, power is delivered across the rev range. BMW really didn't want to have this sort of torque thump that you get in most turbocharged cars. They wanted to try and keep the purity, the feeling of a straight six engine being revved through it. And the N54, M55 engines, they are tuned in that way from standard. So you ask, you know, the best of it comes at the top of the rev range. And for enthusiasts, and it has a growl to it as well. there's a lot of things that the B58, which is the next 3-litre petrol that comes in the next generation, I'll talk about in a moment. There's a lot of real benefits to that engine, but the N55 for purists is probably a little bit more desirable. Okay. However, we're on X3s, so let's be honest. Most people went for the 3-litre diesel who were enthusiasts, wanted speed, but wanted lower running costs. And to be honest, I do not blame them. There's a 30D and a 35D. For some markets, you won't get this. The US, I don't think you get this. I think you only get the 2-litre diesel. Several markets out in the world would have had this, but possibly the 35D will be factory order. If you're a big enthusiast, try and find a 35D. They drive... they're one of the closer diesel engines that you'll get to petrol. Okay, so there's a few engines I've driven that are diesel throughout the years, and I've gone, this manufacturer was absolutely refusing to make a diesel engine until the very end. They just tuned the whole thing to drive as much like a petrol engine as they could. That 35 iteration of the diesel engine, yes, it's got the diesel thump, and yes, it's got power that is more diesel-like. However, it's got a rev band. You go up to 4,500 RPM, which is kind of red line on one of these, and it's still trying to give you more, which diesels really don't normally do. They normally get to 3.5, and they're out of puff, and that's it. And that's more what you get with the 3-litre diesel. However, for most of you out there, the 3-litre diesel would be a great pick. Just be aware, emissions equipment now, a few other sort of ancillary parts. I say it's all in the guide, so don't worry too much if you want to check the details. However, from memory, the 3-litre diesel in any guise on this generation is good. I think if I was in your shoes looking to buy one of these, the 30D would probably take my money, if I'm honest. The 35D is just hard to find, and I think you'll be having to sort of look around a very small choice of vehicles. I think you'll get more on the 30D. So yeah, if it wasn't going to be a petrol, it would be a 3-litre diesel. Next generation, now we go on to the G01 generation X3. And here, I've got, for the first time, I've got a little post-it note here, because I just want to point something out to you, and I couldn't keep all these numbers in my head. And that's that on the G01, sorry I'm looking down away from the camera, but I'll be back up with you in a second, but I want to get these numbers out to you, because the X3 has been in the X5 shadow for 2 generations now. Okay, it's the smaller, or the little brother of the X5. The X5's here, and it's the one for those people that want big SUV, but big engines, all these things. It's the X5. However, the X3 in this generation grows a little bit, and it's starting to get very close to an X3. So you'll all remember E53 generation X3. That's the first generation X3 to ever come out. Now, measurements on that. Its length was 4,666 millimeters. That's 183, just about 184 inches long. Okay, this generation X3, 4,708 millimeters, 185.4 inches long. Okay, the width of them at 1,891 millimeters on the X3, 74.5 inches. Width on the E53, 1,874 and 72 millimeters, 74, as makes no difference, almost 74 inches. I'm actually looking at these things thinking, did I write them down wrong? Because that is making the X3 in this generation a larger vehicle. Now, it is a bit shorter, 66 inches in height, so 1,676 millimeters versus 67, just over 67.5 inches for the X5, 1,707 millimeters to all the way up to 1,760, so 69 inches. And that's because X5s come on different wheels, different suspension. And some of the, I think it's the 48i, 48SR, IS and 46IS, they're a little bit lower. They have their ride height lowered, so that's probably where the 67 is. But basically, an X3 is almost an X5 on this generation, okay? If you really want more on this, I'm actually going to be having a review of this X3 coming to the channel. If you're excited about that, then subscribe, because it will be maybe in about a month's time. A friend of mine is getting one, so I'm going to take his out. But he is getting an iX3, which some of you will go, oh, I don't want to watch that. It's a company vehicle. So I think I mentioned in a previous video, we got to a point we're talking about it, and I'm like, it just was so cheap to get an electric on the company lease that he might as well do that instead of having a petrol or a diesel car. So anyway, iX3. This is the first generation that brings an electric. However, if you're in the US, you don't get it. Most of the world, in fact, do not get iX3s. It's really the markets that BMW can identify, really want to have an electric in the market, or that regulations and laws means they have to bring in. They have to have an electric car, because for every car they sell that's electric, they get a 0 against their emissions requirement, and they get that doubled, and that means that they can then sell you, if you really want one, something like an M3, an M2, an M4, and they can then average out the emissions of that car. So I know some people don't like electric cars, some people absolutely love them, but if you're a car enthusiast, we need to accept that's what the regulations have been. Hopefully they'll become more sensible in the future. Don't hold your breath. But for that sort of summary to happen, where at the end of it they can still sell you one of those higher emission CO2 cars, like an enthusiast car, M3, M2, which probably won't do that many miles over its life, so these figures all get skewed. But the point being, for them to sell that, they need to sell some electric iX3. And so, yeah, I'm quite excited actually driving that. That is coded, it has a slightly different engine code. I think it's G06 or something like that, just as an FYI. I just want to mention something before I go on to the brand new one that's just come out, end of 2024. There's a new generation X3. That car, so I can finish with the post-it note. The X3M, by the way, comes out on this generation. It's coded F97, just as an FYI. And the next generation X3, so the one that's just come out, that is actually 1% larger, 2% wider, and taller than the X3. Okay, so that is bumping up these figures from the G01 generation just that bit more. Okay, so it's now getting to a point, as I say, the only thing that the early X5 has over the G01 and then the most recent generation X3 is height. In every other way, these cars have got much, much larger. And so if you're currently watching this and you've got, say, an F15 generation X5 or an E53 X5, and it's come, that time's come up and you thought, let's see what the miles driven wants to say about this. Well, you can get into an X3 and you won't feel like you've been shortchanged. If you're going for F15, G01, sorry, not the F15 because that is a little bit smaller, but G01 generation onwards, they are larger vehicles. And on the road, they just don't feel much smaller than an X5. You are sat a bit lower. So that's the only thing. When you're sat there, you're a bit like, this feels like a smaller car. And then you could try and get it into a parking space and you realise this is not a smaller car. The reason they're a bit shorter, by the way, and that they haven't sort of bumped the height up because the X5 has got taller and the X7 is now out and has been for a number of years, is all about aero efficiency. Okay, shorter a car is, when they're racing at Le Mans, they don't take SUVs, and there's, it's just the higher wind resistance, all that sort of stuff. It's why electric cars are having to go more and more onto the aero efficiency side to try and bump up that mileage. So anyway, all of that is by the by. G01 generation. First time you get plug-in hybrid, B engine, so B48 and then the B58. B48 is plug-in hybrid or it's on its own, so this is going to be like a 20 model or the plug-in hybrid model. B48 engine, I'm not finding a lot wrong with that, to be honest. To be fair, so just to explain what happens to BMW engines in 2018, petrol engines start to get basically they're all starting to be derived from the B58. If you don't know what the B58 is, it's one of its engines of a generation, and it is. That's not me being a BMW fanboy. That's not me sort of over-exaggerating for the sake of a video. It's nothing like that. The B58 was manufactured between Toyota and BMW. BMW wanted it to be a high-performance, high-power engine. They wanted to really push it and bring in the latest technology, which is what BMW do. And Toyota said, yes, we want all of that too, but we're Toyota. We need to put headroom because the Supra is a legacy. We cannot just put in a high-performance engine And then 7, 8 years down the line say, oh, it's broken down, that's a shame. This car is going to be being modified in 20 years' time for tuners that are trying to get 1,000, 1,500 horsepower out of it. So we need to make this thing as solid as a rock. And the two companies get together, and what's measurable in the automotive world is money. You'll always hear people say, so-and-so company have reinvested X number of billions, or probably not billions, more like millions. You know, they're going to spend 100 million on this engine, they're going to spend 200 million on this engine. And what always gets forgotten, and one of the big factors in automotive, is brain power. Okay, there is a reason why new car entrants or new entrants into the market, new companies fail, and why there are quite literally thousands of car companies that have existed that no longer exist. Some of them, you know, Saab, for example. That's a car company that unfortunately they met their end. And I think a lot of people are sad about that. But the fact is, they're a big headline name of a company that was here, that's no longer here. There's a few British manufacturers like that too. But the reality is, most car manufacturers exist for 6 months, a year, 5 years, and they never get anywhere. There's a very good reason for that, because you can throw oodles of money at it. Early Chinese manufactured vehicles were sort of this sort of situation where they were putting a lot of money in, but the expertise wasn't there yet. And as their industry has grown, they've been able to attract more and more specialists to the industry and obviously develop their own. But brain power, when it comes to automotive, is so critical. You know, there is a reason why in Formula One, they start talking about, oh, this engineer's gone and he's gone to this team or whatever else, because they can make the difference between a car going that little bit faster on the track. When it comes to BMW engineers, these are some of the top in the world. These engineers, automotive engineers around the industry, would love to work at BMW. Toyota is in exactly the same place. But the interesting thing for you is that the mindsets of both companies will be putting to their engineers a different story of what they want from the brand, because it's what they're known for. And when you've got performance and luxury and everything else coming from this side, and reliability and headroom into an engine, and legacy coming from this side, what you get is something like the B58. The B58 engine, that's a 3 litre, but from there BMW are able to derive things like a 3-cylinder 1.5 and their 2 litre 4-cylinder engine. And I think that's why you see very few complaints on the newest 2 litre petrol engines. So B48, it's a good buy. You can have it plug-in hybrid. The plug-in hybrid would tempt me, mainly because it's something that you can sort of run around. If you do a lot of local mileage, you can run around on the battery. If you've got any type of home charging, maybe you've got some sort of renewable energy, you can eke out some free, I want to make, it's not completely free, but let's just put free-ish mileage there, and boost the efficiency of something like a 2 litre petrol engine to possibly beyond what the diesel engine can provide. So plug-in hybrid's really tempting. However, if you're an enthusiast and you found this video because you're an enthusiast, the B58 is in the X3, and again, same story as as the N55. If you're someone that really wants basically a hot hatch again, maybe you had one when you were young, but you've got a family now. Maybe you say you're a bit too tall to get in the smaller stuff comfortably. Maybe you're a bit too big. Maybe you just have had SUVs for so long that you're like, I can't get myself back low down. I don't like being down here anymore. I want to be up here. X3, M40i, B58 3 litre engine. From factory, this engine will probably be more powerful and more capable than you are as a driver. That's a fact, okay? People are tuning these, and you see them, you're like, where do you live? Do you live just near highways that you want to do 150 on? You know, and if you live near the Autobahn and your commute is get onto the Autobahn, do 100 miles, get off the Autobahn, I can kind of understand it. For everyone else, B58 has got so much headroom in it from the manufacturer, and the claim of brake horsepower they're making. The early so the 1 Series in 2018, the 2 Series for some of you that don't get the 1 Series, that also had it 2018, and BMW put, oh yeah, it makes 300 and something horsepower, blah blah blah. And then people just went, I wonder what it's actually making. Put it on dynos, and almost all the time they were getting 20, 30 horsepower more. So then BMW and Toyota both sort of said, okay, yeah, it is making more. And then it was making sort of bang on what they said. And then tuners were coming in and finding another 50 horsepower. They're just such capable engines. And to be honest, I would probably just keep one standard and improve your driving skill, because you've still got the compromise of an SUV. I'd say you can get sort of 70% of the way down a country lane in an X3 that you can in something like Golf GTI. Okay, so if you're an enthusiast, you've got a family, or for whatever reason you want an SUV, if you can get it with a B58, you are unlikely to be disappointed. But for many of you, an X3 is something that's going to be your commuter car, your family car, your regular car for everyday driving around. And for those of you who can buy a diesel in this generation, there is B47, B57. Yeah, they're good engines. I haven't got a lot to say about them because I've seen enough of them now going through sort of long-term ownership, having reports after 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and some of them obviously being on the previous generation. This engine's now around 10 years old on both the 2 and the 3 litre, and people are not saying a lot of bad things about them. The main complaint is usually something emissions equipment wise, software wise, tech wise. That's more where the complaints are. That's all cars today. So many cars are being killed off because they can't match the technology demand of today, not just from you, because you may not care, but regulators. That's the fact, and it's why we'll step into the next generation. So many engines, they just cannot meet the demands for either technological sort of integration or emissions restrictions. Okay, so on this G01 generation, if you want to get yourself the 2 litre diesel, you've got high efficiency, good power. If it's something, if you're not planning on taking it down a country lane and trying to get the most out of it, it'll always be enough for you. The 3 litre though, that's one of those cars, if you say, I'm buying this car, and until the automotive world can sort itself out and tell me what actually is going to exist in 5 years' time, because I don't know whether I'm going to be buying an EV or the world's going to flip on its head and we're going to all be back in diesels. Go and buy yourself a 3 litre diesel and keep it for the next 10 years and do 200,000 miles in it. Job done. There is, as I mentioned at the very start, the F97 generation, specification. That is the M series that comes into this engine. That gets an S58, so that's the higher performance model. Honestly, that car is, I don't want to call it too much, but I think the S58 suits going into like the 3 and the 5 and the 1 and the 2 series. It's not in the 1 series anymore, but I don't think it was it ever? And the M2 gets it. No, so yeah, it's not in the 1. So M2, M3, M4, M5 doesn't have it. Yeah, it suits that type of car. It's just fine. You know, if you're a big enthusiast and the M40i is not enough and you just have to have the next one, I'm not going to talk you out of it, but you may find everything you need in an M40i. The M models are fantastic. It's just the limitations of an SUV chassis will always exist. Okay, and when you start to put more and more horsepower through them, you get closer and closer to that limitation in regular driving. When you're trying to use it, it'll still be the fastest to overtake anything. It's just if you're actually looking to really sort of drive it, that's where the limitation will be. I also mentioned on this generation there is the iX3. Okay, that's coming up. What's that now? 5-ish years old. Came out to about 6 years old. I think I'm just going to do a separate buyer's guide on that one. I'll probably do it after I've driven it. I think it's a really interesting concept. I know why BMW had to bring it in. They had to hugely increase their I range very, very quickly. And the iX3, it was just a good candidate for that. The best thing about an iX3, for those of you who just want to buy a car, but possibly because of what your company want you to drive, because of taxation makes it just impossible almost to get anything but electric, or because you're a big EV driver, you love an EV, you don't need it for, you know, driving hundreds of miles all the time, you mainly drive around locally. The iX3 just answers a lot of questions, but it does it all while looking like a regular X3. But you're not trying to make a statement, and I'm not saying people driving, you know, Teslas or whatever are, but sometimes it can seem that way when you're driving something that is specifically an EV, and maybe it's got some wacky features on the outside that trying to sort of glitz and glamour it way into the mainstream. Here you can just have an X3 and you've just got a BMW and you can take it to the shops and No one's going to try and make a comment of whether you've bought an electric or a diesel or a petrol or all this nonsense that goes around the world today, which I don't really think is that apparent in the real world. But if your main interest is just having a car, yeah, iX3. It just looks like an X3. There's nothing, apart from the front grills being a bit blanked off, but you've really got to know your cars to be like, there's an X3, there's an iX3. I remember, where was I? I was working, where was I? It was a few years back anyway. I was working for, I think it was Car Buyer at the time, and went to a car park, and there was an X3 and an iX3 parked next to each other. And as much as I sort of be like, yep, that's the iX3, that one there, it took everyone else, who wasn't so enthusiastic about cars or wasn't there for the reason of seeing these cars or whatever else, it took them a minute to go, oh, okay, I can kind of see it now. But you've got to be looking for it. So if you're in that sort of proportion of people and you had an iX3 available in your market, it's doing something that some other electric cars aren't, and it's not making any statement about you. It's just a BMW. Last generation, and this is kind of, well, this is the new one, so there's not too much I can say on it. As I said, with the figures I gave you before, we're now sort of basically bigger than the first generation X5 in everything but height. It's either mild hybrid engines if you go for a 2-litre petrol, it's B48, B47 for the diesel, just a single diesel option, which is a 2-litre diesel, and the B58 is still there. This is a bit time will tell sort of thing. Again, if you're out there and you think, oh, I'm going to buy a new car, and that's it, until the world has sorted itself out and I know what the next iteration of cars are really going to be, and lawmakers and manufacturers and everyone else have actually sat down and said, yes, we all want to reduce emissions, yes, we all want higher performance, yes, we want to do it in a way that is sort of environmentally friendly, long term, actually recycling the whole car, everything else that goes with that, batteries, blah, blah, blah. And you're there like, look, I just want to buy a new car. And to be honest, I just want to keep it. You have two 2-litre engines to choose from and a 3-litre and the B58 engine. Again, if you can take the high cost that it's going to be to buy, because it's a higher emitting car, BMW are doing what a lot of manufacturers are doing, and they're putting the price of those right up because they're like, well, we need to sell less of them. And that's not them. No manufacturer out there, I think, wants to sell less cars, but they have to meet the regulations for emissions. So the big engine stuff, bigger engine stuff has to be priced accordingly. So they've moved it up price-wise. But if your budget does stretch and you think, I just want to keep something, get a B58 one of these. That's a 3-litre one, a 3-litre petrol. However, a mild hybrid 2-litre will probably last just as long, if I'm honest, unless you're really always sort of on the performance of it. And it's going to have a lower fuel bill. There's less cylinders to take care of, so that means lower servicing cost. It's a smaller engine in general. You can have it with a plug-in hybrid. That would kind of be my pick on this generation. However, as I say, it's still very new, so I don't know if there's any sort of small issues here or there. They do have the diesel, and if you have the diesel in your market, this is going to almost certainly be in the current era of cars. And what I mean by that is, for all we know, in 5 years' time, there will just be whatever type of new fuel that comes out. Maybe that will be more man-made fuel, maybe we'll have blended fuel, maybe we'll have some crazy answer that the government have dreamt up. I don't want to sort of talk too much about that, but this is probably the last time someone's just going to make a straight 3-litre engine. Okay, just like there's a 3-litre mild hybrid engine. After that, we're likely to see either them disappear, or there'll be maybe generators for electric batteries so that you have a generator on board, you don't have to charge up. Manufacturers are looking at all these types of options, not because they want to go that way, but because actually customer demand is saying, yeah, London taxi. Yeah, if you don't know what London taxi is now, it's an electric vehicle, but it's not. It's got an engine, it generates enough power to charge a battery. So the wheels are being driven off a battery pack. The engine is there to sort of charge that up, and then they can charge the vehicle when they need it. But it exists because London cab owners were like, well, I'm not going to change my old diesel then, because a fare could turn up at any time, and I'm not turning away business. I remember, I think I told everyone this in the podcast a couple of years back. I said I was in Denmark, got a lift to the airport, and the guy was in an electric Mercedes, and he just we started talking about cars. He found out, what I was doing, and he was like, "Oh, you need to talk about this car. It's terrible." And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I had an editor at the time that was solely working in the electric space. I said, "Is it something wrong with the car?" And he said, "No, it's just as a cab." He said, as a cab owner in Denmark, he was in Copenhagen, and he was like, he has to have this. He had to change to it for some legal reason or some sort of regulation reasons. And he's like, "I'm losing fares. I'm having to actually turn people away because they're saying, 'Can you take me 100 kilometers away?'" Great fare for him. The sort of fare that cab drivers really like. Long distance, high charge, single fare, guaranteed money. And he's having to turn it away because at that particular time he only had 80 kilometers charge. And he's like, "Oh, can you come back in like 15 minutes?" And they went, "No, call the next guy," and he loses the fare. And I'm just using the cab example because people are not as versatile in the majority. Okay, there's a lot of people that like charging up, but others want a multitude of answers. Because of all of that, we're seeing a demand still for diesel engines because people want a quick answer. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Okay, I'm just saying it's there. It's a real issue. People can ignore it on one side if they want, and they can multiply it on the other side if they want. I don't really care. I'm just saying on this generation, if you want something that's going to do a ton of mileage and has been so far very, very reliable, and you want the high fuel economy because possibly you do longer trips, you can still have a 2-litre diesel engine in some markets in this car. And that may just be the pick if you're not going to go plug-in hybrid and you're not that bothered about high performance. There will, of course, be an electric version that will follow in some time. Now, that's the whole X3s, but I told you we were going to have a little bit of Alpina time at the end. So can you guess what the Alpinas were? They were called the XD3, if that helps. So what they did is they took the 3-litre diesel model and they made it something mega. Okay, the 3-litre diesel on the XD3 on its first generation, which is the F25 generation X3, so the second generation X3, they basically get that 3-litre diesel and they make it a real competitor for the 35i model, so the petrol model. They make it more powerful than the 35, more fuel efficient, don it in Alpina stuff. It's a cracking looking vehicle, very rare, probably will run until the end of time with that 3-litre engine, even with it tuned up. Alpina do a proper job on this. So there's your Alpina option 1. Your Alpina option 2 comes out in like 2018, 388 horsepower from a 3-litre diesel engine. And then in 2021, despite what everyone's saying about diesels, they go, people still want it from us, 394 brake horsepower, 800 newton meters of torque, 760 newton meters if you buy an 18 to 21. This is everything that an SUV that is sort of the high power special model should be. Because look, it's not trying to get on track and get itself up against one of the classic V8 Ferrari or Audi R8 or BMW M3s of the sort of E46 generation. It's not trying to do that at all. It's saying, here I am some wave of torque that will take you to where you want to go like you've taken a plane. And if you live in a country with either higher speed restrictions or none in some areas, this is the executive transport that you want to take. And it's just, I don't know, I think it's fantastic that Alpina built this thing because it's like, they could have just switched and said, "Oh, you've got the B58. Oh, we'll just modify the petrol engine now. We'll give up on the diesel." No, that diesel. Let's give it one last hurrah, and they do. And I think that's really fantastic. And they look great. The Alpinas, very rare, huge residual values. So they're going to cost you a lot of money. But again, if you're in that position where you've had, let's say you've had an E53 X5, then you've had an F15 X5 with a diesel engine, then you got yourself an X3 and you had a diesel engine, and you've seen less and less diesels in the last 5 years, and you're like, I don't want to give up a diesel. You just love the thing. So you can get yourself an XD3 because that thing that will be the ultimate of all the diesels you've probably had, and you can keep it for the next 10, 15, 20 years. But it's Euro 6 emissions onwards, so it shouldn't really get banned from places. It probably will eventually, because who knows what regulators will do next. But come on, that is something to celebrate. One of those XD3s. It really is. So yeah, they exist I haven't seen anything for the latest generation. I think because Alpina are now merging with BMW, these two XD3s will stand out in Alpina history from the sort of SUV side, because Alpina's going to disappear in a way. It's not going to be independent anymore. It's sort of going to be rolled into BMW as of sort of this year, because ultimately, with all the latest emissions and safety equipment and everything else, Alpina realised there just isn't space for the small manufacturer anymore. BMW didn't want to lose Alpina. Alpina doesn't want to lose BMW, and so they're making that work. But it probably will mean a different type of cars. I'm tempted to say it would have been electric, but I'm not quite sure. Maybe Alpina will be a future sort of a proper sort of AMG version for BMW. Maybe they'll use them in that way. Who knows what the future holds there. But if you want that little bit of time-stamped history and say, yeah, I've got an XD3, people won't know what it is for the most part. You know, people will recognise its sort of X3-ness, but only a real enthusiast will sort of stop you in a car park and say, hey, nice car. And I don't know, if you're a big enthusiast, but you had to have something more efficient, something bigger for family and whatever else, you probably missed those days when you had something a little bit fun. And, you know, you just pull up in a supermarket car park or whatever it was, and someone would start talking to you about your car and be like, hey, I like your car, you know, hey, I've got one of these, blah, 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 and you start having a bit of a conversation. If that's you, yeah, you're probably still going to keep that if you buy one of these. So that's the whole video. As I said, there will be a review of the iX3 coming up on the channel. I'll have to arrange that in the future, but if you want that, then subscribe. If you've enjoyed the video, then subscribe. But otherwise, have a really nice day, and I shall see you in the next one.